I woke to a scream that shattered the morning calm. Not the usual bird song or the soft hum of my solar panels drinking in the dawn, but a high-pitched, rage-fueled screech that jolted my heart into overdrive. Throwing on my robe, I bolted outside and froze. My solar panels were gone, ripped clean off my roof, leaving jagged wires and a gut punch of violation where my state-of-the-art array once stood. Then I saw her, Karen the HOA tyrant standing smugly in my yard, arms crossed, smirking like she just hit the jackpot. "You weren't in compliance, Mark," she cooed, her voice thick with fake pity. "So I fixed the problem." Fixed, my blood pressure rocketed so fast I could hear my veins straining. I stared at the empty roof, panels I'd spent thousands on, installed perfectly within HOA rules, now vanished because of this woman whose moral compass rivaled a raccoon raiding trash. I clenched my fists, sucking air through my nose like a bull ready to charge. "You stole my property," I growled, barely holding back words that land me in cuffs. Karen sighed, theatrical as ever, like this was all a chore for her. "Confiscated," she corrected. "You were warned about the violation. Those panels were an eyesore, didn't fit the community aesthetic. The board agreed." I stepped closer. She didn't flinch. "Where are they?" "Oh, repurposed," she said, waving vaguely toward the HOA clubhouse. "Much better use, don't you think?" My eye twitched. Repurposed. My panels, legally mine, torn off and handed to the HOA like some communal trophy. My hands ached to throttle something, her rule book preferably. "This is theft," I said, voice low, controlled. "I have security footage. You had no right." Her smirk flickered, but she recovered, tilting her head like I was a dim kid. "Oh, Mark, I am the HOA, and the HOA makes the rules." My fingers tightened around the phone in my pocket. I wanted to call the cops, but I knew she'd buried some loophole in the fine print, her specialty, twisting rules to torment people, flexing her petty suburban dictatorship. Neighbors peeked out, whispering, their eyes flickering with concern and fear. Karen had crushed too many to be challenged openly. She turned, flipping her over-bleached bob, strutting to her golf cart, the same one I'd seen on my footage hauling my panels away. "Oh, and Mark," she called, "take down that ridiculous electric fence too. It's against code." She drove off, my pulse thundering. That was it, the moment I knew she started a war she couldn't win. I spent hours packing, seething, replaying the footage of Karen and her HOA goons dismantling my panels like smug bandits. Legal routes crossed my mind. File a complaint, Sue. But she'd rigged the system, the board was her puppet, and I'd end up fined while she gloated. No, I had to be smarter, ruthless, a little wicked. Then it hit me, a spark flaring into a diabolical plan that curled my lips into a grin. She wanted dirty, I'd give her shock therapy. I grabbed my tools and got to work, installing new solar panels, not on my roof, but on that electric fence she hated. If she thought she could steal without consequence, she'd get a jolt she'd never forget. By sunset, my masterpiece gleamed, a fence wired to zap anyone dumb enough to grab it, harmless but humiliating. I sat on my porch, sipping a beer, waiting. Karen wouldn't resist trying again, and this time she'd learn what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. The night before the trap was set, sleep eluded me, not from nerves, but from a buzzing excitement, the kind that fizzes in your chest when you know karma about to strike. I'd spent the day wiring those new solar panels into my electric fence, every connection flawless, a simple yet genius setup. Touch it, and you'd get a sharp, unforgettable zap, harmless, but enough to make anyone think twice about pawing my property again. Karen, with her greedy hands and bloated ego, was bound to take the bait. It was only a matter of time. Morning came, and I played it cool, mowed the lawn, watered plants, even waved cheerily at neighbors who eyed me with barely veiled curiosity. The HOA rumor mill was churning. Everyone knew about the theft, but fear of Karen's wrath kept them silent. Then, right on cue, Noon brought her golf cart rumbling up, Karen in her oversized sunglasses and self-important strut, trailed by her minions, Todd and Linda, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her voice boomed across the yard, loud enough for all to hear. "Mark, I warned you," she announced, stepping out with dramatic flair, "and yet here we are, more solar panels, more violations. You never learn, do you?" I shut off my hose, wiping my hands on my jeans, feigning confusion. "Violations? I don't recall breaking any rules." She sighed, exaggerated like I was a slow child. "The HOA has strict aesthetic policies and your little science project. An eyesore. I gave you a chance to comply, but since you refuse, I'll have to remove them again." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean steal them again?" Todd and Linda swapped nervous glances, but Karen didn't blink, too drunk on her own delusions. Confiscate, she corrected, smug as ever, and since you don't learn, I'll add a fine this time, a big one. I crossed my arms. So you're planning to break onto my property again and take what's mine? Her smile tightened. Mark, stop thinking of it that way. This is about community standards, and as HOA president, it's my duty to enforce them. Now will you take them down, or do we have to? I fought a grin. She was walking right into it. Shrugging, I stepped aside, gesturing to the fence. Go ahead. Her smile widened. She turned to Todd and Linda. Well, get to work. Todd hesitated. Karen, are we sure about this? Last time people were upset. She snapped her fingers. Stop being dramatic, Todd. They're just solar panels. Do you want your HOA privileges revoked? He gulped, stepping forward, reluctantly reaching for the first panel. Then it happened. His fingers brushed the frame and a crackling jolt hit him. His body jerked, a shout escaping as he stumbled back, hair spiking like a cartoon electrocution victim. Linda, instinctively grabbing to steady him, got zapped too, yelping and flailing before landing on her backside. Karen, caught between them, gaped in bewilderment. What the? Before she finished, she lunged for the fence herself. The zap was glorious. Her scream, a full-on horror movie wail, sent birds scattering as she convulsed, tripped over a flower pot in her panic, and face-planted into my azalea bush. Silence fell for a blissful moment, then snickers rippled from nearby neighbors. Laughter erupted, a whistle of approval piercing the air. Karen scrambled up, red-faced, petals in her hair, shrieking, "What just happened?" I leaned against the fence, suppressing a grin. Oh, did I mention? I wired my panels to my electric fence. Gotta protect my property, you know. Her jaw dropped and the trap snapped shut. Karen stood there, disheveled and florally adorned, yanking azalea petals from her hair as the neighborhood's laughter rang in her ears, a symphony of her own making. You can't do that, she sputtered, her face a mask of shock and fury. I leaned casually against the fence, the hum of its low voltage a quiet triumph under my words. Sure I can. My fence was already here, perfectly legal, and the panels, mine. I'm just protecting what's mine. Todd, still reeling, muttered, I think my soul left my body, while Linda sat rubbing her arm, whining, I can still feel my teeth vibrating. Karen, though, wasn't laughing, her face twisted into pure, unfiltered rage. You think this is funny? You think you've won? I nodded, calm as the morning she'd ruined. Oh, I know I have. Her lips trembled into a tight line, and she whirled toward the growing crowd of neighbors, some filming, others grinning wide. This is a violation, she screamed. Mark has endangered the community. This is a criminal offense. I'm calling the police. I tilted my head toward the security camera on my porch. Please do. Let's show them the footage of you and your goons breaking onto my property, trying to steal from me again and getting exactly what you deserved. Her face paled. The crowd murmured, a few cheering outright. For the first time, Karen realized she'd lost, not just the moment, but the optics. She stomped her foot like a petulant child, spun on her heel, and stormed to her golf cart, Todd and Linda scrambling after her, shell-shocked. The cart screeched off, leaving tire marks and my swelling satisfaction behind. The fallout hit like lightning. By evening, the neighborhood buzzed, literally and figuratively, with the tale of Karen's electrified tumble. The security footage spread faster than gossip at a church picnic, popping up on social media, group chats, even TikToks racking up thousands of views. Karen flailing in my bush like a raccoon in a trash can was the star, and I was the unsung hero who'd finally zapped her reign of terror. She wasn't one to slink away, though humiliation only stoked her fire. Next morning, I found a formal HOA violation notice taped to my door, flapping like a war flag. Illegal electric fencing, dangerous and non-compliant, immediate removal required. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Illegal. The fence had stood for years, unbothered until it thwarted her thievery. This was rich, and I wasn't letting it slide. I'd turn it against her. I grabbed my phone and fired off an email to the HOA list. Dear neighbors, in response to Karen's concerns about safety, I'll host a live demo of my dangerous fence's capabilities. If you feel at risk, come see for yourself. 5 p.m. refreshments provided. By late afternoon, 30 folks gathered, lawn chairs, snacks, a full-on event. Karen arrived, arms crossed, flanked by 2 board members, one looking like he'd rather bolt. I stood by the fence, hands in pockets, grinning. All right, let's settle this. My dangerous fence runs on a solar-powered, low-voltage system, harmless, but if you're skeptical, let's test it. I gestured to Karen. Since you're so worried, why not volunteer? Her nostrils flared. I'm not touching that death trap. Then I will, I said, and before she could protest, I slapped my hand on the fence. Nothing, just a mild tingle, exactly as designed. The crowd murmured, some laughing. Mike, a neighbor, stepped up. Wait, this is what Karen called the cops over. Her face went beet red. That's not the point, it's the principle. It's an eyesore, a hazard. Mike squinted. Looks like a normal fence to me. The trap was tightening, and Karen didn't see it yet. The crowd's laughter grew as Mike's words hung in the air, his squint at my fence, a perfectly ordinary sight, poking holes in Karen's bluster. She froze, her face a deepening shade of red, as another neighbor piped up. Didn't Karen steal your solar panels? The energy shifted. This wasn't just about my fence anymore, it was about her tyranny unraveling. I folded my arms, seizing the moment. Great question. Karen never explained why she thought it was okay to rip thousands of dollars worth of panels off my roof. A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Karen floundered. It was an HOA decision. I raised an eyebrow. So where'd the HOA put my panels? They're not on my roof anymore. Her bored crony, Richard, a balding man beside her, cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, that's something we need to discuss. Karen's head whipped toward him so fast I thought she'd sprained something. What? Richard sighed, running a hand over his face. Look, after last night's incident, some of us looked into your financial decisions. The crowd went silent. Karen's breathing turned shallow. What do you mean? Richard hesitated, then dropped the bomb. The solar panels weren't repurposed for the community like you said. They were sold. We traced the money. He sighed again, disgust creeping into his voice. Karen, you used HOA funds for personal expenses. A spa membership, a Peloton, a $500 steakhouse bill. Gasps erupted. Someone muttered, "Oh, hell no." Her face drained from red to ghostly pale. That's ridiculous. I was reimbursing myself for HOA business. Richard cut her off, firm now. You embezzled HOA funds. We have receipts. We're calling an emergency vote to remove you as president immediately. A roar of approval burst from the crowd, cheers, claps, pure elation. Karen's eyes darted, horror sinking in as her reign crumbled. She opened her mouth, but the noise drowned her. Get out, Karen, someone shouted. Take your rules and leave, another yelled. She whirled toward me, eyes blazing with venom. This is your fault, she screamed. I flashed my widest, most satisfied grin. No, Karen, this is karma. That broke her. With a wordless shriek, she stormed to her golf cart, revved it like a getaway car, and peeled out, dust trailing her retreat. The board voted her out within the hour. The financial scandal, paired with her public shamming, made recovery impossible. By morning, she was gone, house quiet, no sign of her. I stepped onto my porch, breathing deep, the crisp air tasting like freedom. Mike ambled over, handing me a cold beer. That, he grinned, was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. I clinked my bottle against his. To Karen-free living. Cheers erupted around us, peace settling in like a long-lost friend. My solar panels were returned, the HOA restructured, and my electric fence stood tall. Turns out, everyone liked it better than Karen. For a moment, I thought it was over, the war won, my home mine again. But as I sipped that beer, a flicker of doubt crept in. Karen didn't just vanish, she festered. She'd lost everything here, but someone that unhinged might not stay gone. I'd humiliated her, exposed her, cost her power she'd clung to like a lifeline. If she came back, it wouldn't be with golf carts or rule books, it'd be personal. I shook it off, basking in the wind. The sun shone, the neighborhood buzzed with relief, and my fence gleamed, a quiet guardian. For now, victory was mine, and I'd savor it, ready for whatever she might throw next. The neighborhood basked in the afterglow of Karen's downfall, a rare harmony settling over us like the calm after a storm. My solar panels back on my roof, the electric fence standing proud, and the HOA scrambling to rebuild without its dictator. That first week was bliss. No golf carts buzzing, no violation notices flapping on my door, just the hum of my panels soaking up the sun and neighbors waving with grins instead of whispers. Mike's beer toast had sparked an impromptu block party, lawn chairs, shared snacks, laughter echoing where Karen's screeches once reigned. People swapped stories of her petty crusades, fining Mrs. Ellis for a non-approved birdhouse, banning Tom's kids' lemonade stand for commercial activity. My fence zap became legend, replayed on phones with glee. The HOA board, sans Karen, sent a sheepish email promising transparency and my panel's return, already done, thanks to Richard's guilt-driven hustle. For once, I felt like I'd won more than a battle. I'd freed us all. But Victory's shine dulled when I spotted a for sale sign on Karen's lawn a few days later. Too quick, too quiet. She'd fled, sure, but that gnawing doubt grew. Someone like her didn't just quit. I kept my routine mowing, tinkering with the fence, sipping coffee on the porch. But my eyes drifted to her empty house. No moving trucks, no goodbye wave, just gone. Neighbors speculated. She's too embarrassed to show her face, Mike said. Probably living it up with that steakhouse money, Mrs. Ellis quipped. I nodded, but unease prickled. Karen thrived on control, not retreat. Then 2 weeks post-zap, a letter arrived, HOA letterhead, no return address. Notice of appeal. Former President Karen requests reinstatement vote, citing procedural errors in removal. My stomach sank. She wasn't done. She'd gone legal, likely from some hideout twisting rules from afar. I called Richard, who sounded exhausted. She's claiming we didn't follow bylaws, says the vote was invalid without her present. She's got a lawyer. I cursed under my breath. Of course she'd lawyer up, clawing back power with loopholes. Can she win? I asked. Doubt it, he said, but she'll drag it out, cost us money, make us miserable. Classic Karen, defeated yet still swinging. I rallied the neighbors that night, Mike, Mrs. Ellis, Tom, a dozen others, over coffee and determination. She's not slinking back, I said. We've got the footage, the receipts, let's bury her appeal. Nods all around, we'd fight, united this time. Next day, I dug into the HOA bylaws, dry as dirt but a goldmine. Her removal vote aligned with every rule. Her procedural error claim was smoke. I emailed the board, attaching the Zap video, Richard's financial findings, even testimonials from the crowd. Overkill maybe, but I wanted her crushed. Richard replied fast, filing this with our lawyer tomorrow. She's got no case. Relief hit, but I stayed wary. Karen's desperation could breed chaos. That night, I tweaked the fence's voltage, just in case, grinning at the hum. She'd lost the neighborhood, her title, her grip. This appeal was her last gasp, and I'd choke it out. Days later, the board called, appeal denied, her embezzlement too damning. Karen was out for good, her house sold quietly to a young couple who waved instead of glared. Peace held, but I kept the fence live, a silent vow. She'd started this war, I'd finished it, and if she ever crept back, I'd be ready. For now, the sun shone, my panels gleamed, and the neighborhood breathed free. Karen's reign a fatting echo, my victory a quiet hum in the wires. With Karen's appeal shot down, the neighborhood exhaled, a collective sigh of relief that rippled through porches and yards, unshackling us from her shadow. The new couple in her old house waved daily, their dog yapping playfully where her golf cart once terrorized. My solar panels hummed, the fence stood sentinel, and the HOA board, humbled, mailed out apologies with promises of reform. That first month post-Karen felt like a rebirth. Mike hosted a barbecue, Mrs. Ellis hung a birdhouse in defiance, Tom's kids sold lemonade without a peep of complaint. The Zap video still circulated, a neighborhood trophy, but talk shifted to summer plans, not past tyrants. Her for sale sign vanished, replaced by flower boxes, and I let myself believe she'd truly gone, out of moves, out of our lives. The bylaws I'd pored over sat on my desk, a victory map I didn't need anymore. Richard confirmed her lawyer had slunk away, case dead. I sipped coffee on my porch, the lake breeze cool, thinking I'd won the war, not just a skirmish, but the whole damn thing. Yet a flicker of caution lingered. Karen's silence felt too absolute, like a predator gone to ground. Then 6 weeks after her appeal flopped, a package arrived. No return address, just my name scrawled in Sharpie. Inside, a cheap HOA rulebook, pages dog-eared, and a note in her jagged handwriting. You think you've won, Mark, but rules change. Enjoy your little fence. My pulse quickened, not a surrender, but a taunt. I turned the book over. It was from a neighboring HOA, not ours. Had she moved nearby, plotting a comeback? I called Mike over, showing him the cryptic gift. She's messing with you, he said, trying to get in your head. Maybe, but Karen didn't bluff without a play. I drove past her sold house, still quiet, new owners oblivious, then checked county records online. No trace of her nearby, but that note gnawed at me. Next day, I hit the HOA rumor mill. Mrs. Ellis heard Karen had joined a rival board 2 towns over, infamous for draconian rules. She's their problem now, she laughed. I didn't. Her note hinted at more than relocation. It felt personal, aimed at me. I beefed up my security cameras, kept the fence juiced, and watched the horizon. If she'd infiltrated another HOA, she could lean on them to harass ours, or me, through petty alliances. A week later, confirmation came. A snarky email from that rival HOA, citing boundary concerns near my property line unsigned but reeking of Karen. Our board laughed it off. My land was solid, their claim baseless. Still, it was her handwriting testing me, probing for weakness. I fired back through Richard. Tell them to shove it, legal docs on file. They backed off, but I knew she wouldn't. She'd lost here, so she'd strike from afar, indirect, insidious, like a wasp circling. I rallied the neighbors again, Mike, Tom, Mrs. Ellis, over beers. She's not president here, but she's not gone, I warned. Keep eyes open. They nodded. We'd beaten her once, we'd do it again. I tweaked the fence higher, added a motion sensor, overkill maybe, but peace wasn't free. Karen was a ghost now, haunting from a distance, her note a promise of chaos. I'd ended her reign, but not her spite. For now, the sun powered my panels, the neighborhood thrived, and my victory held, fragile but mine. She started this with theft. I'd finished it with cunning. If she came back swinging, I'd be wired and waiting, the hum of my fence a quiet dare. Karen's taunting note and that rival HOA email lingered like a bad smell, a reminder that her defeat here hadn't snuffed her venom. She just slithered elsewhere to hiss from the shadows. The neighborhood stayed vigilant. Mike patrolled with his dog, Mrs. Ellis kept her binoculars handy, and I upgraded my cameras. The fence's hum now synced to a motion alert that pinged my phone. Our HOA, chastened by her scandal, tightened bylaws. No more confiscations without votes, and Richard swore they'd block any outside meddling. Summer rolled on, hot and lazy, the lake glinting as kids splashed and barbecues smoked. Her old house bloomed under new owners, erasing her footprint, and I let the days blur, half convinced her cryptic rules change was empty spite. But Karen didn't bluff without teeth. I'd learned that the hard way. 2 months after her package, a new wrinkle hit. A county zoning notice mailed to every house on our block proposing a buffer zone between our HOA and the rival one she'd joined. It shrink our lake access by 10 feet petty, but enough to irk, and it stank of her. I dug in. The proposal came from her new board, citing aesthetic harmony. Bullshit. Harmony didn't shrink my property line. I called a meeting Mike, Tom, Mrs. Ellis, a dozen more, spreading the notice on my table like battle plans. She's behind this, I said, tapping the paper. Lost here, so she's choking us from there. Nods all around. Tom scowled. She can't let go. Mrs. Ellis smirked. Bet she's sipping spa water while we fight this. We strategized. Our HOA filed a counterclaim. I hired a surveyor to prove our boundaries, and Mike rallied signatures opposing the change. The county hearing loomed, and I prepped like a general, maps, deeds, photos of my fence and panels, a timeline of her theft. Day of we packed the room, 30 of us, united, facing her new board's lawyer, a slick guy in a cheap suit. No sign of Karen, but her fingerprints were everywhere. He droned about community standards. I countered with hard evidence, my voice steady. This is retaliation from a disgraced ex-president who embezzled from us. The crowd murmured. The lawyer squirmed. Our surveyor testified. Our lines were legal, their buffer baseless. The county board, bored and unimpressed, killed the proposal in 10 minutes. Cheers erupted as we spilled outside, victory sharp and sweet. Back home, I cracked a beer with Mike, the fence humming its quiet anthem. She'd swung and missed again, her buffer zone dead, her new board embarrassed. But as dusk settled, my phone pinged, a grainy photo from an unknown number, my fence snapped from the lake with nice try scrawled in red. Karen watching, still out there. I showed Mike, he cursed, she's unhinged. Maybe, but unhinged with a camera was a step up from notes. I doubled the fence voltage, still legal, just spicier, and added a spotlight. She lost the zoning fight, her third strike here, yet she circled like a vulture, personal now, not just HOA games. I'd beaten her theft, her appeal, her buffer, each win tighter, cleaner, but her obsession gnawed at me. The neighborhood thrived, my panels powered on, and our unity held her at bay. For now I savored the quiet, the lake hours, her reign a fatting scar. She started this war with arrogance, I'd countered with grit. If she struck again, from the water, the shadows, wherever, I'd be ready, my fence a live wire, my resolve steel. Peace was mine, but I slept with one eye open. The grainy photo of my fence with Karen, nice try, scrawled in red, burned into my mind. A taunt from the lake's edge, proof she hadn't slunk away but lurked, watching, waiting. Fall crept in, leaves gilding the shore, and the neighborhood leaned into its Karen-free rhythm. Mike's dog chased squirrels, Mrs. Ellis's birdhouse swayed, Tom's kids raked piles for jumping. My solar panels gleamed, the fence hummed with its beefed-up zap, and the spotlight swept the yard each night, a silent dare. Her buffer zone flop had stung her new HOA. Rumors swirled they'd sidelined her after the county debacle, too toxic even for them. I'd won again our unity, a wall she couldn't breach, but that photo kept me sharp. She'd lost her presidency, her house, her schemes, yet she clung to this feud like a lifeline, her spite now a lone wolf's howl. I added a second camera, angled at the water, and slept lighter, the hum of my defenses a lullaby. Winter loomed, and I figured the cold might freeze her out, until Christmas Eve when a splash woke me. I bolted up, phone pinging, motion alert lakeside. Camera feed showed a figure in a dark coat, knee-deep in icy water, tugging a rope tied to my dock. A small raft bobbed, loaded with something square, solar panels mockingly like mine, Karen staging a twisted tribute. I grabbed a flashlight, stormed out, and caught her mid-act, red-handed, soaked, eyes wild. "What the hell are you doing?" I barked. She froze, then smirked, unhinged. "Returning what's yours, Mark. Thought you'd like the view." Her voice dripped venom. She'd snapped this her last, desperate jab. I shone the light. The panels were plywood fakes, a petty taunt. "You're trespassing again." She laughed shrill. "Public water, genius, can't touch me." She was right, like rules shielded her barely. I filmed her anyway, phone steady. "Cops might disagree when they see this." Her smirk faltered. She yanked the raft free, splashing back to shore, vanishing into the dark. I called it in harassment, not theft, but enough. Patrol nabbed her a mile away, soaked and ranting, charged her with disorderly conduct, a slap but a mark. Her new HOA dumped her next day, per Mike's intel. She'd burned every bridge. Her house stayed sold, her name faded from chatter, and spring brought quiet. No notes, no emails, no splashes. The raft stunt was her final gasp, a lunatic's encore, and it flopped. Cops, neighbors, even her allies done with her. My panels powered on, the fence stood unbothered, and the HOA mailed a plaque. "Honorary member, Mark, for service against tyranny." I hung it by the porch, grinning. Karen was gone, really gone, her war lost to my patience, my wires, my community. Mike clinked a beer to it, Mrs. Ellis baked me cookies, Tom's kids drew a cartoon of her zapped in the bush. The lake sparkled, hours again, her reign a ghost story we'd laugh about for years. She started it with theft, swinging her tiny power like a club. I'd finished it with cunning, turning her rules against her, her spite into her own trap. If she ever resurfaced, unlikely, broken as she was, my fence waited, live and loyal. For now, I sat on my dock, coffee warm, the sun rising over a neighborhood reborn. Peace wasn't just restored. It was mine, earned through every jolt, every fight, every stand.